And there once again is the sound of what was the leader in worldwide radio broadcasting. I spent some time living in London and studying with the BBC, and of course the shortwave BBC World Service was the premier broadcaster, and that was one of the sounders that they used. And oftentimes along with that would actually be the chiming of Big Ben, and they actually recorded it or listened to it live. There was a microphone there, and it just reminds me of some of those good times where I was put in a situation where if I really wanted to be a leader in my industry, I had to learn from the best. And we paid the price both in money, agony, and ecstasy to do just that. So that's why we're doing that. Because this is Friday on Interesting Ideas, and Interesting Ideas on Friday is Future Day, and it's also Leadership Day. It's where we talk about what leadership might require, and for those of you who want to be, perhaps some things that could make you a little more effective, maybe a little more compassionate, certainly more powerful if you want to be a leader. And that's a little bit about what we're going to do today. Yes, the program is entitled The 7 Most Powerful Words in the English Language. And on this Friday, flowing into the weekend, I'm going to tell you a nice little story, and I'm going to tell you what those 7 words are. I'm Stan Houston. The program is Interesting Ideas, and it begins right now. First of all, take all of that leadership stuff that you may have learned and all of those courses and all of those books, and please keep in mind most of that stuff isn't true. I'm really sure of that, because it oftentimes misses some essential truths that we never find in the business, in the psychology, in the management, in the so-called leadership courses. Because as I will tell you, leadership is primarily a spiritual practice. That's right. Whether you believe in that or not, leadership is primarily a spiritual practice. Now, you may not be a religious person, you may not believe in any of that stuff, but if you want to be a leader, it is a spirit practice, and you have to learn some of the habits of the heart and some of the strategies and skills of the spirit. That's the deal, and I'd be glad to talk about it, be glad to even debate it, but most of all, I'd just simply like to share it with you and then hear from you. Let me tell you a story. Now, you ask the question after this, okay? After I tell you the story, you ask the question, Stan, is that a true story? Is it real? Okay? Remember now, you ask that question as I read the story to you. Here we go. All right, just a short story, very short, okay? In fact, it's kind of like a parable, all right? The business executive was deep in debt and could see no way out. Creditors were closing in on him. Suppliers were demanding payment. He sat on the park bench, head in hands, wondering if anything could save his company from bankruptcy. Suddenly, an old man appeared before him. "I can see that something is troubling you," he said. After listening to the executive's woes, the old man said, "I believe I can help you." He asked the man his name, and he wrote out a check and pushed it into his hand, saying, "Take this money. Meet me here exactly 1 year from today, and you can pay me back at that time." Then he turned and disappeared as quickly as he had come. The business executive saw in his hand a check for $500,000 signed by John D. Rockefeller, then one of the richest men in the world. He thought, "I can erase my money worries in an instant." He realized, but instead the executive decided to put the uncashed check in his safe. Just knowing it was there might give him the strength to work out a way to save his business, he thought. The fear was gone. With renewed optimism, he negotiated better deals and extended terms of payment. He closed several big sales. Within a few months, he was out of debt and making money once again. Exactly 1 year later, he returned to the park with the uncashed check. At the agreed-upon time, surely the old man appeared. But just as the executive was about to hand back the check and share his success story, a nurse came running up and grabbed the old man. "I'm so glad I caught him," she cried. "I hope he hasn't been bothering you. He's always escaping from the rest home and telling people he's John D. Rockefeller." And she led the old man away by the arm. The astonished executive just stood there, stunned. All year long he had been wheeling and dealing, buying and selling, convinced he had $500,000 behind him. Suddenly he realized that it wasn't the money, real or imagined, that had turned his life around. It was his newfound self-confidence that gave him the power to achieve anything he went after. Do you believe that story? Is that a real story? Well, you know what? There's a good chance it's not a real story. But it's a true story. Did you get that? I oftentimes tell people, I say, not all of my stories are real, but they're all true. And someone challenged me on that, and I have a little way of dealing with this. I said, "Have you ever heard of a guy named Jesus?" And well, yeah. Well, I'm not a believer, but yeah, I've heard of him. And I said, he told one of the great stories. It's known and loved by many. It's the story of the prodigal son. Now tell me, was that a real story or was it a true story? Now, of course, the point is, it's a parable. Jesus didn't say it was real, but indeed, it was true. And that's the point. That's the point that I want to point out, is that many times we forget that the power of stories is not whether they are real by our own distribution, imagination, or whatever rational thing or process or filter we put it through, is the question. And the question is it true? And if it's true, then we should probably do something about it. So I don't think that's a real story, but it might be. There was, if you're as old as me, a story many years ago. It was on television. It was very well done, and it was called The Millionaire. And the story framed around that there was this legendary, and he never appeared in the story. His name was John Bears Fatipton. And he had a hobby, and the hobby was that he liked to give $1 million. Now, remember, in those days, $1 million was a lot more money than $1 million is today. And then the story was, what happened to people who got tax-free $1 million? What would happen to their story? What would happen to their life? One of the things I have oftentimes coached people to say in terms of their own strategic planning in life, it's something like this. All right, the millionaire has now graduated to greater amounts, and now the millionaire, whoever he or she may be, and by the way, as we are now discovering, it could very much be a she. As I pointed out in my program yesterday, it could be Rihanna. She's a billionaire. And She's going to change some of the priorities in life, and maybe part of it is giving it away. And so they give you $25 million tax-free. And you know what? There's only two conditions. First of all, you have to give 5 million of it away. Who would you give it to? And the second condition is it must be not just for you, but it must be something that can benefit others. You can do what you want with it, but just make sure that part of what it does has some benefit for others. And you can decide whether it is or whether it does. But those are the only two things you have to be concerned about. Okay, now, what would you do? Now that you've got $20 million, and obviously that means you don't have to go to work again if you're smart. You know, a simple investment will take care of a very comfortable lifestyle. So what would you do? And from that understanding, what do you now know to be true about you? Even though that's not a real story or a real situation, what do you now know would be true for you? And now that you've had to make a decision about the 5 million that you would give it to, again, what did you learn that is true about you? Here we go. I want you to think about that, because we're going to keep it sharp and short today because you've got a busy weekend. But I want to remind you of this great truth. The most powerful words in the English language for leadership, for selling, for communication are these 7 words. Please, let me tell you a story. Please, let me tell you a story. By the way, I begin every presentation and every speech that way. And many times, that's simply the way I begin a lot of my radio programs. And whether I say it or not, that's what I usually do. In fact, as I illustrated at a seminar one time on storytelling, the person came up to me and said, I was fascinated by the subject. You know, all business is show business. That was the topic. How do you tell your stories? And he said, I had notebooks ready to take notes, and you know what happened? It was hard for me to take notes because all you did was tell stories. That's right. The way I illustrated, quote, how that business is show business, and why, here we go. The 7 most powerful words are, let me tell you a story, is I did that by telling stories. One of the things that caught me many, many years ago was I was in broadcasting. I came across a book, and it was written by a woman who was a journalist and a communicator, and she was talking about the fact that, and this was written from a spiritual perspective, is that most of the good news that we have, whether it's a church or an organization or whatever, stays in-house, you know. She says it's like keeping all of the salt in the salt shaker rather than spreading the salt around. And her book was, out of the salt shaker and into the world. Salt preserves. Salt is helpful. And most of us have good things, but we don't know how to put it into the world. And then she came across this saying, and I give her full credit. Thank you. I don't know where she is now, Rebecca Pippert, bright woman. And she said, here's the issue. The master teacher came into the world, and he told stories, and he asked questions. So what do? We preach sermons and give answers. And I said, We give sermons, presentations, PowerPoints, brochures. We do all of those things. We in effect say, aren't we wonderful? Aren't we wonderful? Aren't you lucky to be here with me? But think about that. Rather than, doing that, why don't we tell stories and ask questions? The key line is very simple. Remember that a truth told is good, but seldom heard. A truth revealed has greater yield, but a truth discovered is best of all. And a truth imposed is no truth at all. And one of the best ways, as the master teacher knew, to get people to discover the truth for themselves was to tell a story and then ask questions. Just please let that sit on your head, maybe stir your mind, move your spirit, and maybe even touch your heart today. I'm Stan Houston. Some radio ramblings on a weekend from interesting ideas with What It Takes Radio. I'll be right back. One of the things that I simply ask people to do is most people follow up their Super Bowl commercial. Let me ask you, in your life, in your business, in the cause for the organization that you certainly feel strongly about, and more as I am discovering about genetic diseases and these rare diseases and how they afflict people, I want to get involved. And I know the best way is not to go into scientific data and all kinds of other information. I just need to tell stories. Some of them are sad stories. Many of them are great and happy and wonderful stories. All of them are designed to inspire hope. 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 And so are you, a living storyteller of hope? And if you're not, why not? I'm Stan Houston. Please reach out to me. What It Takes Radio, witradio.net. We're teaching people to get their story out and their message out. And as a performance coach, someone who can help you in life and business to perform at your very best. Because remember, all business is show business. I will talk about that some other time. But reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. May the weekend go well. Do some of the work you got to finish up. Take time to rest and take a nap. Relax. Spend some time doing nothing. Spend some time in reflection, thinking about your own life and how it could be different. And take time to do what you were made for, and that is to worship. Just an idea from the twilight zone of life for your thought and consideration. Best and blessings. Bye for now.